I will operate him. The black maid who saved a billionaire's life after he stopped breathing. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. Sarah Adebayo moved through the cavernous Sterling mansion like a ghost. A silent, efficient presence, whose primary function was to erase any evidence that life was actually lived there. She polished marble floors until they reflected the cold, indifferent light filtering through the cathedral-sized windows. She dusted gilded frames that held portraits of stern-faced ancestors. And she straightened velvet ropes in rooms that no one ever entered. Her movements were a ballet of practiced economy. Each sweep of her cloth, each step of her soft-soled shoes, a testament to her quiet professionalism. But behind her calm, impassive eyes, a different world churned. As her hands worked, her mind diagnosed. She saw the faint tremor in the old butler's hand, not as a sign of age, but as a possible early symptom of Parkinson's. She noted the pallor of a young kitchen maid, and wondered about her iron levels. Her mind, once trained to scan MRI results and interpret cardiograms in a bustling Lagos teaching hospital, now scanned her surroundings for signs of life and decay, a skill she could not switch off. It was a form of self-torture, a constant reminder of the life she had lost, a life of purpose, of healing, a life that had vanished in a blur of family tragedy and bureaucratic indifference that had left her stranded in a new country. Her brilliant medical career reduced to a stack of unrecognized credentials and the demeaning simplicity of a maid's uniform. She was particularly observant of the master of the house, Mr. Alistair Sterling, a man who commanded global markets from a leather throne in his study, but who seemed to be losing a silent war with his own body. He was a creature of rigid routine, his life managed by a team of assistants, and his ever-present preening personal physician, Dr. Evans, a man whose arrogance was matched only by the price of his silk ties. Sarah saw things the doctor, in his brief scheduled visits, seemed to miss. The subtle bluish tinge to Sterling's lips on humid days, the way he sometimes paused halfway up the grand staircase, his hand pressed discreetly to his chest, the almost imperceptible swelling around his ankles. She saw the classic signs of congestive heart failure, not as a chart in a textbook, but as a living, breathing tragedy unfolding in slow motion. She was a healer trapped in the role of a servant, a witness to a disease she was powerless to treat. Her vast knowledge, a silent, screaming burden in the gilded cage of the Sterling estate. The day it happened began like any other. The oppressive silence of the mansion was punctuated only by the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner and the ticking of a dozen antique clocks, all marking a time that seemed to have stopped decades ago. Alistair Sterling was in his study, a room paneled in dark wood that smelled of old leather and power. His son Robert was with him, a pale imitation of his father, possessing all of his arrogance but none of his substance. Robert was pacing, his voice a whining counterpoint to his father's gruff dismissals. They were arguing about money, as they always did. Robert wanted a larger stake in the company, a promotion he hadn't earned, a life of reward without effort. Sarah was just outside the door, dusting a marble bust of some forgotten Roman emperor, her presence as unnoticed as the air itself. She could hear the conversation, the rising tension, the sharp, angry words. Then she heard a different sound, a choked gasp, followed by the heavy, definitive thud of a body hitting the floor. The argument stopped. A moment of stunned silence, and then Robert's voice, high-pitched with panic. "Father, Father, what's wrong? Get up." Sarah's head snapped up. Her heart, which usually beat with a slow, steady ache of resignation, began to pound with a different rhythm. It was the rhythm of the emergency room, the familiar, terrifying drumbeat of a crisis. She didn't hesitate. Pushing the heavy oak door open, she stepped into the study. The scene was one of chaos and terror. Alistair Sterling lay crumpled on the Persian rug, his face a ghastly shade of gray. His eyes were open but unseeing. Robert was shaking him, a useless panicked gesture that was making things worse. Someone called Dr. Evans. Robert shrieked, not to Sarah, but to the room in general. "Call an ambulance. Do something." The butler was already fumbling with his phone, his trembling hands making it impossible to dial. Sarah moved past them all, a calm, focused energy cutting through the hysteria. She knelt beside Mr. Sterling, her training taking over, pushing aside the fear, the uniform, the years of quiet submission. Her fingers went to his neck, searching for a pulse. It was thready, weak. She put her ear to his mouth, feeling for breath. Nothing. She looked at his chest. It wasn't moving, but something else was wrong. His neck veins were horribly distended, and one side of his chest seemed higher than the other. It wasn't just a heart attack. He had likely fallen, and the fall had caused something worse. Sarah's mind raced, processing the symptoms with terrifying clarity. Asymmetrical chest movement, distended jugular veins, absent breath sounds on one side, tracheal deviation she could feel with her fingertips. It was a textbook tension pneumothorax. Air was trapped in his chest cavity, collapsing a lung and squeezing his heart, preventing it from beating. He was not just dying, he was being actively suffocated from the inside. Every second, the pressure was building, a deadly balloon inflating within his chest. An ambulance was on its way. Dr. Evans had been called and was speeding over from his downtown clinic. But Sarah knew, with the chilling certainty of a seasoned physician, that they would not be fast enough. This condition didn't kill in 20 minutes, it killed in 5. He had maybe 2 minutes left, if that. He can't breathe, she said, her voice sharp and clear, startling Robert out of his frantic stupor. Air is trapped in his chest. Robert stared at her, his face a mixture of grief and utter disbelief. What are you talking about? You're a maid. Get away from him. You'll hurt him, he yelled, his words laced with the venom of class and prejudice. There's no time, Sarah insisted, her voice rising with an authority that stunned the other staff into silence. We have to release the pressure. Now. The old butler, holding a phone, looked up. Dr. Evans is on his way, ma'am. He said not to touch Mr. Sterling. That was the protocol. That was the rule. Wait for the credentialed professional. But Sarah knew the rules were about to carry a death sentence. Her own past flashed before her eyes, a promise made to her own dying father, that she would use her gift to heal, never to stand by and watch someone suffer. That promise had haunted her through every polished floor and dusted table. It was the core of who she was, buried beneath layers of servitude. To act now would be to risk everything. Her job, her precarious existence in this country, even her freedom. Robert could have her arrested. Dr. Evans would see her ruined. It was an impossible choice. Her own future, or this man's life. She looked down at Alistair Sterling's face, at the life rapidly fading from him. The choice was never really a choice at all. Get me the emergency medical kit. Sarah's voice rang out, no longer the quiet murmur of a servant, but the sharp commanding tone of a doctor in the trauma bay. It was a command so out of character that it shocked everyone, including Robert, into a moment of stunned obedience. The butler, his hands still trembling, pointed toward a large cabinet. In there, ma'am. Mr. Sterling insisted on having the best. Sarah flew to the cabinet, pulling open the doors to reveal a medical kit that was better stocked than many rural clinics. It was a testament to Sterling's wealth and his fear of mortality. She laid it on the floor, her hands expertly flying through the neatly organized compartments, pushing aside bandages and antiseptics. She was looking for one thing. Robert finally snapped out of his trance. What do you think you're doing? I told you to get away from him. You're going to kill him. He lunged for her, trying to pull her away. Sarah spun around, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never imagined possible. He is already dead if I do nothing, she yelled, her voice raw with desperation and conviction. His heart has been squeezed to a stop. I have to let the air out. Her hands found what they were looking for, a sealed packet containing a large-bore intravenous catheter, a 14-gauge needle designed for rapid fluid infusion. To her it was a lifeline. To Robert, it looked like a weapon. She ripped the package open with her teeth. I forbid you to touch him, Robert shrieked, positioning himself between Sarah and his father's body. You are nothing. You are a maid who cleans our toilets. I will have you thrown in jail for the rest of your life. The other staff huddled by the doorway, their faces pale with terror, caught between the sheer force of Sarah's conviction and the fury of their young master. For a fleeting second, Sarah saw the abyss yawn before her. The prison cell, the deportation, the end of everything. But then she saw the image of her father's face again, heard the echo of her promise. She looked past Robert, at the dying man on the floor. Move, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, or he will die right here, in front of you. The standoff lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. Sarah's unwavering, ferocious gaze held a certainty that Robert's panicked blustering could not match. He stumbled back, not in agreement, but in sheer shock at the transformation of this woman he had never even truly seen before. That was all the room Sarah needed. She knelt beside Mr. Sterling again, her mind a bubble of calm in the swirling storm of the room. The world narrowed to a single critical task. She tilted his head back, her left hand finding the clavicle, her fingers walking along it to the mid-clavicular line. She located the second intercostal space, a precise point she could have found in her sleep. It was a landmark seared into her memory from countless hours of training and practice. She whispered a silent prayer, not to God, but to the memory of her professors, to the muscle memory in her hands. She took the large needle, holding it like a dart. This was it, the point of no return. She ignored Robert's horrified gasp, the butler's muffled sob. She saw only her target. With a firm, practiced motion, she plunged the needle into Alistair Sterling's chest, pushing through skin, fat, and muscle, until she felt the distinct pop of the needle piercing the pleural lining. The sound was immediately followed by another, far more dramatic one, a loud, sustained hiss, like the sound of air being released from a punctured tire. It was the sound of a life returning. The pressure that had been strangling Alistair Sterling's heart was venting out through the catheter she had just inserted. At that exact, impossibly dramatic moment, the study door flew open, and Dr. Evans burst in, followed by two grim-faced paramedics. He took in the scene at a glance, his billionaire patient on the floor, the hysterical son, the terrified staff, and the black maid kneeling over the body with a needle sticking out of his chest. The doctor's face went from pale with exertion to purple with rage. "My God," he screamed, his voice cracking with fury and disbelief. "What have you done? Get away from him! Security! Call the police! This woman has assaulted my patient. She's murdered him." The paramedics rushed forward, pushing Sarah gently but firmly aside. She didn't resist. The adrenaline that had fueled her began to drain away, leaving a cold, terrifying emptiness in its place. She stumbled back, her job done, her fate sealed. She watched as one of the paramedics checked Sterling's neck. "I've got a pulse. It's weak, but it's there," he shouted to his partner. He looked at the catheter in Sterling's chest, then at Sarah, his eyes wide with a dawning incredulous respect. "Did you do this?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah could only nod, her body beginning to tremble uncontrollably. Dr. Evans, meanwhile, was apoplectic. "She stabbed him. She's insane. I want her arrested immediately," he bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. Robert, seeing his father's flicker of life, but still processing the horror of what he had witnessed, immediately sided with the doctor. "She attacked him. I saw it. Arrest her." The room was a cacophony of accusations and medical jargon as the paramedics worked to stabilize Sterling, preparing him for transport. A household security guard, a man who had always been polite to Sarah, approached her, his face grim with regret. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I need you to come with me, please." He led her out of the study, past the gawking staff, and into a small, sterile waiting room. The door closed behind her, and she was left alone with the crushing silence and the chilling certainty that she had just saved one life only to completely destroy her own. She sank into a chair, the full weight of her actions crashing down on her. She had honored her promise. She had been a doctor again, for 3 desperate minutes, and now she would pay the price. She waited for the sound of police sirens, the final mournful sound of her future ending. The scene at the hospital was one of controlled chaos. Alistair Sterling was wheeled into the emergency department, the trauma team descending on him instantly. Dr. Evans was at their side, trying to take charge, recounting his version of events in a loud, self-important voice. He was assaulted by a member of his staff. She stabbed him in the chest with God knows what. The lead trauma surgeon, a woman with tired eyes and an air of no-nonsense authority, cut him off. "Let's just focus on the patient, shall we?" She assessed Sterling, her eyes quickly taking in the needle still secured in his chest, the improved vital signs on the monitor, the story the paramedics were relaying. She ordered an immediate chest x-ray and began her own examination. Robert paced in the hallway, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and a strange, unsettling new emotion he couldn't name. He had seen Sarah, the maid, transform into something else entirely, something powerful and terrifying. He had seen her defy him, ignore him, and then jam a needle into his father's chest. And yet, his father was alive. The paramedics had said so. He saw the way they had looked at Sarah, not with contempt, but with something that looked disturbingly like professional respect. The trauma surgeon came out a few minutes later, pulling off her gloves. She walked directly over to Dr. Evans. "The chest x-ray confirms a massive tension pneumothorax, likely from a fractured rib piercing the lung during his fall," she said, her voice flat and clinical. The pre-hospital needle decompression performed at the scene was life-saving, unequivocally. Dr. Evans stared at her, his jaw slack. "What?" he stammered, but it was the maid. She had no idea what she was doing. It was a lucky, reckless guess. The surgeon's tired eyes narrowed. Dr. Evans, she said, her voice dripping with ice. The needle was placed with textbook precision in the second intercostal space at the mid-clavicular line. That is not a lucky guess. That is the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Whoever she is the reason Mr. Sterling is not in the morgue right now. Another 2 minutes of pressure on his heart, and he would have been unsalvageable. You should be thanking her, not trying to have her arrested. The surgeon turned and walked away, leaving Dr. Evans standing in the hallway, his face a mask of stunned, humiliated silence. Robert had heard every word. The surgeon's statement was a wrecking ball to his entire worldview, a world where people were neatly categorized by their uniforms and their job titles. The maid, the savior. The two concepts were warring in his head, and the foundation of his lifelong arrogance was beginning to crack. Alistair Sterling drifted in and out of consciousness for the next 24 hours. His body, though saved from the immediate crisis, was still fighting a desperate battle. In the lucid moments between waves of pain and medication, his mind kept replaying the last few seconds before he lost consciousness. The fall, the crushing pressure, the face of his panicking son. But there was another face, one that swam into focus just as the darkness was claiming him. It was the face of his maid, Sarah. But it wasn't her usual impassive, subservient expression. Her eyes were on fire, her face a mask of intense, focused determination. It was the face of a warrior. He remembered a voice, cutting through the chaos, a voice of pure command, and then a sharp, piercing pain, followed by a sudden, blessed release of pressure. He remembered the feeling of being able to take a breath, even a shallow one, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, when he finally woke, clear-headed and weak in the sterile white of the ICU. His first question was not for his son or his doctor. "Where is she?" he rasped, his voice rough. "Where is the woman?" Sarah. Robert, who had been sitting a somber vigil by his bedside, shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Evans, summoned by the nurses, quickly stepped in, attempting to control the narrative. "Alistair, you need to rest," the doctor began, his tone smooth and placating. "There was an unfortunate incident. Your maid, in a state of panic, acted recklessly. Thankfully, the paramedics and the team here were able to correct her mistake. But Alistair Sterling had not built a global empire by being a fool. He was a man who dealt in data, in facts, in results. The story didn't add up." "Mistake?" he whispered, pinning Dr. Evans with a gaze that, even in his weakened state, could make powerful men tremble. "The surgeon who saw me, Dr. Hansen, I want to speak with her, and I want the full ER report. Now." An hour later, with the report in his hands, he saw the truth laid bare in the cold, black-and-white print of medical terminology. Tension, pneumothorax. Pre-hospital needle thoracostomy. Life-saving intervention. He read the surgeon's notes, her clinical assessment of the procedure's precision. He saw it all. The maid had not made a mistake. She had performed a miracle. The meeting was arranged in his private hospital room 2 days later. Sarah was brought in by the head of hospital security, her face pale and drawn, her eyes cast downward. She was dressed not in her uniform, but in a simple dress she had borrowed. She looked small and defeated, fully expecting this to be a formality before the police were called. She had been kept in a state of limbo, not fired, not arrested, just waiting. It was a unique form of torture. When she entered the room, Alistair Sterling dismissed everyone else with a wave of his hand. His son Robert hesitated, then left, unable to meet Sarah's gaze. Dr. Evans, looking pale and diminished, practically fled. The security guard closed the door, leaving the two of them alone. The silence was thick with unspoken words. Sarah stood by the door, her hands clenched, waiting for the verdict. Alistair looked at her, truly looked at her, for the very first time. He did not see a maid. He saw the woman from his fading memories, the warrior with fire in her eyes. "They told me you made a mistake," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "They told me you were a hysterical servant who got lucky. They lied." Sarah finally looked up, her eyes meeting his. She saw no anger in them, only a deep, searching curiosity. "Tell me," Alistair said, his voice softening, "who are you, Sarah?" It was a simple question, but it was the one thing no one had asked. It was an invitation to be seen. And so, the story came pouring out, not in a rush, but in a quiet, dignified torrent. She told him of her father, a respected professor in Lagos, who had inspired her love for medicine. She told him of her years at the top of her class, the dream of becoming one of Nigeria's foremost cardiothoracic surgeons. She told him of the car accident that had taken her parents, the political instability that had consumed her family's savings, and her desperate move to America on a visa that allowed her to work but not as a doctor. She spoke of the endless, soul-crushing cycle of trying to get her credentials recognized, of the exams that cost thousands, the residency applications that were never answered, the quiet, systemic dismissal of her foreign training. She spoke of the moment she had finally given up, packing her dreams away with her medical degree, and taking a job as a maid to survive. She spoke without anger or self-pity, stating the facts of her life as a clinician would state the facts of a case. Alistair Sterling listened, his expression unreadable, but his mind reeling. He had spent his life surrounded by the best, the most credentialed, the most expensive. He had put his faith in systems, in reputations, in the carefully constructed hierarchy of the world. And yet, when his life was on the line, that entire system had failed him. The man he paid a fortune to protect his health had been useless. His own son, the heir to his empire, had been a panicked child. The only person who had acted with courage, with knowledge, with decisive skill, was the woman who cleaned his floors, a woman his world had deemed unworthy. He saw with blinding clarity the monumental injustice, the criminal waste of talent. He saw the face of a brilliant surgeon, hidden in plain sight, scrubbing his toilets. When she finished her story, the room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was a silence of profound understanding. He felt a wave of shame so deep it was almost physical. Shame for his own blindness, for the arrogance of the world he had built. He reached out his hand, his gesture slow and deliberate. "Sarah," he said, and her name on his lips was not an order but a plea. "You saved my life. Now let me save yours." He fired Dr. Evans that afternoon, a cold, brief phone call that ended a decade-long professional relationship. He had a long, painful conversation with Robert, a conversation that was not about money, but about character, about value, and about the blindness of privilege. And then, he made Sarah an offer. He would not just give her money, he would give her back her dream. He would use his immense resources to clear every obstacle from her path. He would pay for the best tutors, the most expensive exam prep courses, the legal teams to navigate the bureaucracy. He would personally lobby the boards of the city's top hospitals to grant her a residency position. He created a new foundation, the Sterling Second Chance Foundation, with a single, clear mission, to help highly skilled, foreign-trained professionals like Sarah get the certifications they needed to work in their chosen fields in America. The final scene was not an ending, but a new beginning. A year and a half later, Dr. Sarah Adebayo, dressed in a crisp white coat, stood in a hospital viewing room, looking at a complex cardiac scan. Beside her stood Alistair Sterling, healthier than he had been in years. They were looking at the scan of another patient, discussing options, their conversation easy and collaborative. They were not a billionaire and his former maid. They were a mentor and his protege, a patient and his doctor. Two souls bound together by a single moment of crisis that had revealed the truth of who they both were, offering them both the rarest of things, a second chance.